So the story, two individuals, our age, not very different than many of us. One of my best friends, Samir Bhatia, 32 years old, grew up in Seattle, went to Stanford. This is a very personal story that we're actually here at Stanford presenting this to you. He's my co-founder in a company called Monkey Bin. We started this company up in San Francisco. And he was diagnosed with leukemia in 2007. And at the same time, right around the same time, another friend of ours, Vinay Chakravarti, who grew up right here in the Bay Area in Fremont, a doctor, went to school out in Boston, also diagnosed with leukemia a little bit earlier than Samir in 2006. Both of them newlyweds, and just beginning to really emerge and sort of take on life's challenges and faced with this devastating disease. Some pictures. These are photos of them not very long ago. I mean, Samir was married less than a year before he got diagnosed with leukemia. Same with Vinay, he was recently married, just finishing up with med school. So what is leukemia? So it's a cancer of the bone marrow. It's a blood-forming cancer that actually causes cells to multiply. And many of you probably have read about leukemia, may know friends or other people in your families or acquaintances who have been struck by leukemia, and it's a devastating disease. The statistics aren't good either. In 2008, roughly 45,000 people diagnosed, almost 22,000 deaths in the United States from leukemia. And there's a whole range of treatments: cord blood transplants, chemotherapy, bone marrow transplants, radiation. The challenging part of this disease is that there's no one approach, and each manifestation of leukemia in each individual is actually very different. And the way this works, sort of very simply, is that it affects the bone marrow, and bone marrow is spongy tissue sort of inside your bones that produce the white and red blood cells in your body. And very simplistic representation, but your native stem cells, your blood stem cells, form myeloid cells and lymphoid stem cells. And lymphoid stem cells create white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. And your myeloid stem cells create red blood cells which help with carrying oxygen to the tissue in your body, platelets which help with clotting, and also white blood cells. And with leukemia, what happens is that a lot of these cells multiply at a very rapid pace. It's sort of chaos in your body, and it really affects the ability for your body to have a normal immune system. And this is what happened to both Vinay and Samir. So how do you treat this? For a lot of patients, a bone marrow transplant, literally getting a new immune system from a donor, is really the only approach that is effective. And a bone marrow transplant, many of you may be familiar with, others may not be, is really when you wipe out somebody who has leukemia, their immune system, by destroying their bone marrow through chemotherapy and through radiation. You extract and withdraw bone marrow, healthy bone marrow, from a donor, and then you contribute that and inject that in the form of a transplant to the patient. Now, finding a donor is very difficult. There's genetic match parameters that optimize the ability for you to actually have a successful transplant. And there's roughly 10 match parameters that are needed to have a successful transplant. And the highest probability of getting a successful transplant, or a high match, a 10 out of 10 match, comes from the same genetic pool. Luckily, there's this amazing database called the National Marrow Donor Program, which Asia is connected to through her organization. And today, actually, this number is a lot larger. There are 7.4 million people in the United States who are part of the donor registry. And I think this was formed 1986, 1987, and back then it started with 10,000 people. So the good news is that there's this very, very, very large registry of individuals who have indicated that they may be willing to contribute their bone marrow to a patient in need. Now, the challenge, well, for Caucasians, let me stop and say that there's a very high probability that you'd find a match. There's a very large database, and the likelihood of finding a match is somewhere in the range of 80%. So for the roughly 7 million registrants, only 20% are minorities. So if you're a minority, and if you're South Asian, it's only 1% match. 1% number of registrants in the donor register are actually South Asian. So if you're South Asian, the odds that you'd actually statistically find a 10 out of 10 match or a reasonable match are very low. In fact, they're 1 in 20,000. So this was the challenge faced by Vinay and Samir. They did not find matches in the registry, and oftentimes you can find matches in your direct family, 30%, 20, 30% of the time. So most times you're unsuccessful within your own family. The only option you have is to go to the registry. Neither of them were able to find a match. So to make matters worse, we said, well, why don't we just go to India? There's a billion plus people there. The likelihood of finding a genetic match with somebody in such a large country is hopefully pretty high. The problem is, in a country with 1 billion people, if you could believe it, there's no bone marrow registry. There's no formally organized national bone marrow registry. And so this is a big challenge. Huge opportunity and huge potential, but there's no luck and no opportunity for them to actually get a bone marrow transplant through a donor registry in India. So the idea and the challenge was, well, with leukemia being a disease that could potentially take their lives in a matter of months, what were we to do? So we got together, Sandeep, Dayal, we met with Asia, and a lot of other volunteers really started to think about, how can we actually help these guys? And it was difficult because we saw reflections of ourselves. These were our very, very close friends. And our natural sort of desire was to solve the problem. Well, what do we need to get done to actually fix this? How can we help them? And this innate human need to attach yourself to something that you can do to find a solution is very, very strong. And the challenge is that with this disease, there actually are very few solutions, but we knew that we had to do something, anything. So we had a few options. We could rely on the healthcare system and the range of treatments that were presented to you earlier and just say, you know what, medical therapy will take its course. We could do something, and do something in this case meant to figure out, well, let's start finding out if we're a match. Let's get our friends, let's get our families registered. Let's try to get a handful of folks very quickly tested and determine if we're a match for our friends. The other option was to actually step back and say, well, that's not enough. We need to do something really big, really, really big, really seismic. And the simple answer to what that seismic thing would be was that if the odds of finding a match are 1 in 20,000, all we needed to do, hold bone marrow drives and register 20,000 people. And very quickly we realized, well, 20,000 people, okay, let's do it. Let's figure it out. And we'll find a match. And then that will address their leukemia, and hopefully they can get a transplant. The problem was we had a matter of weeks to actually get this done. So the challenge was we needed to move fast. We needed to scale very quickly. And we couldn't fail. It wasn't an option not to find a match for these guys. And so we'll come back to this concept and this framework that Jennifer asked me to sort of think through. And it was very, very chaotic at the time. To put some structure to that, yes, we had to figure out a way to grab attention. We had to figure out a way to engage people and take action. All of these things at the time didn't look so clean. It was simply, holy shit, we have 20,000 people that we need to go get registered in a matter of weeks. How do we do that? But what you'll see through this campaign that we'll show you is that a lot of the principles that we applied fit really cleanly into these simple concepts of grab people's attention, create an emotional connection, and then have a very clear and crisp message and a call to action. I'm going to ask Dayal to talk a little bit about how we did this through social media and social technology.